Welcome to the deep dive. You came to us looking for a clear, concise, and college-level summary of the evolution of behavior, culture, and society drawn directly from the research in Strickberger's evolution. That's our mission today.
It is. We are cutting straight to the core of how traits evolve, especially human traits, under, well, two distinct and vastly different systems of inheritance.
Right, there's the well-known genetic system.
Exactly. And then there's the non-genetic cultural and social system. The goal today is really to distill the evidence for instincts versus learned behaviors, and then explain the resulting radical acceleration of evolution in our species.
It sounds like it all revolves around that classic question, the one we've all heard, probably since grade school, about nature versus nurture. But our source material makes it clear that the classic way of asking how much is maybe, well, entirely the wrong framework.
It really is. We need to shift from seeing it as some kind of competition to seeing it as a profound and continuous interaction.
Okay. So where do we start to understand that interaction?
Well, we have to start with a biological foundation. Instincts. These are, complex innate behaviors, often pretty uniform across a species, and they appear to be hardwired or genetically controlled.
Like what sort of things?
Think of the intricate, species-specific courtship dances animals perform, or the incredibly detailed waggle dance that honeybees use to communicate food distance and direction. Amazing stuff.
That is fascinating about the bees. How deep does that genetic control really go, though? Are scientists able to, isolate the actual genes responsible for these highly complex actions?
They are finding surprising specificity. Research has identified genetic pathways associated with courtship behavior in species like Drosophila, the fruit fly.
Okay.
And beyond just identifying them, we see evidence that specific genetic mechanisms, often highly localized, can influence social pathways. For example, in mice studies, researchers found genetic alterations that seem to impact little else except for reduced social interaction and, interestingly, poor nest building.
Huh. So it's not just one big behavior gene.
No, not at all. This confirms that behavior is far from monolithic. It can be controlled by very specific, dedicated genetic architecture.
And of course, we know that genes are absolutely involved in human nervous system disorders that dramatically alter behavior, things like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. It really reminds us that biology sets the foundation for our behavioral range.
Definitely. But those hardwired instincts, they're only half the story. The other half is learned behavior, which serves as an equally powerful evolutionary adaptation.
How so?
Because an individual can modify their actions based on their own experiences, or, crucially, the experiences of others. Learned behavior lets species respond far more quickly to environmental and social pressures than, slow-moving genetics ever could.
Okay, that makes sense. Learned behavior is the bridge to something bigger.
Yeah.
And we see phenomenal non-human examples of this social learning. My favorite is the Caledonian crow.
Ah, yes. The tool makers.
Exactly. These birds don't just use found tools, they manufacture barbed and hooked tools from pandanus palm leaves. They're creating sophisticated, custom implements.
And that manufacturing skill is a perfect example of adaptive social learning. It's hypothesized pretty strongly to be passed through observation and tradition.
And it pays off.
Oh, yeah. The fitness benefit is huge. Those manufactured tools satisfy about 20% of the crow's daily energy needs. They represent a clear evolutionary leap enabled by non-genetic means.
And we see cooperative social learning in action, too, right? There's that experiment with rooks, another type of crow.
That's right. In that study, the tolerant pairs, the ones more socially easygoing, learned to cooperate much faster. They had to simultaneously pull two ropes for a food reward.
And they did better.
Much better. They succeeded something like 63% of the time. The intolerant pairs only managed 20%. It shows learning and maybe social tolerance matter a lot.
So experience drives fitness.
It does, even when the underlying behavior might be more instinctive. We also see, for example, higher nestling mortality, particularly among female chicks, in herring gulls when they're incubated by younger, less experienced parents.
Ah, interesting. So the parent's experience, which is a kind of learned social history, directly impacts offspring survival.
Precisely. So whether it's highly sophisticated tool use or just, better parenting, experience clearly drives fitness.
But how far back does this type of social organization go? Can we even infer behavior from the fossil record? I mean, bones don't behave.
Hey, true. But absolutely we can infer. Though we can't observe actions directly, the fossil record offers clues. Finding a dinosaur preserved on a nest, for instance, That offers insight into parental behavior.
Right.
Or observing sexual dimorphism, physical differences between sexes in fossil primates can suggest social structures, maybe like dominance hierarchies.
Okay, I see.
Even fossilized footprints can tell a story. Finding adult and child prints together, for example, speaks volumes about the social organization of early hominids.
Now we make the jump to the human species, and here's where I gather it gets really interesting. Humans possess a dual inheritance system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it exponentially accelerates the transfer of information across generations.
So two systems working together.
In parallel, yes. System 1 is the traditional gene-based system, phenotypic inheritance via DNA. That's the physical or visible traits passed vertically from biological parent to offspring, the one we usually think of.
Okay, and system 2.
System 2 is the dominant culture-based system, social inheritance. It's transferred via imitation, learning, tradition, language, custom, all of it. This ability for cultural transmission largely bypasses the hazards and, frankly, the sheer lack of speed associated with individual trial and error learning.
So culture is like a shortcut for learning.
In a way, yes. And the term culture can actually be extended to non-speech organisms if the transmission occurs purely through imitation. We see this in chimpanzee populations.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they exhibit dozens of different learned behavior patterns, like specific grooming techniques or tool traditions that vary from community to community, even when the genetic differences between those chimp populations are minimal.
Wow. So it's really about how it's transmitted.
That's the crucial differentiator from biological evolution. Cultural changes are not restricted to that slow vertical line from parent to offspring.
Right. You don't have to be related to your teacher.
Exactly. Cultural parents need not be biological parents or even geographically related. Isolation barriers that stop genetic exchange, like a mountain range or an ocean, do not necessarily stop cultural transmission. Think ideas spreading online today.
Good point.
And this speed and freedom is directly supported by our defining feature, human intelligence. Our immense mental capacity lets us analyze environmental experiences, consciously incorporate those lessons, and crucially, create entirely new environments, technological, social, political, over which we exercise massive control.
That's the engine of conscious cultural evolution, then.
Precisely.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me. Let's talk about the Great Acceleration, because you're saying cultural evolution has dramatically outpaced phenotypic evolution.
It absolutely has.
You're essentially saying that a single generation can culturally leapfrog thousands, maybe millions of years of biological evolution. That seems like the real insight here.
It is. The sources show that the doubling time for collective human knowledge, which once took many thousands of years, now occurs in, well, a mere handful of years. The contrast in speed is just astonishing when you look at the mechanisms.
Right. Phenotypic evolution is slow. It's inherently incremental. It needs those changes in DNA, genome organization, and then selection has to act on the resulting phenotype. It's an extremely deliberate, multi-generational process.
Whereas cultural evolution,
Lightning fast.
relatively speaking, yes. Its generation time is as rapid as communication allows, the speed of sound or, the speed of electrons now. And the selection mechanism is novel. It involves the conscious selection among behavioral alternatives by human minds. We choose what ideas or techniques to adopt or discard.
But wait a minute, if cultural evolution is so dominant and so fast, hasn't it effectively replaced natural selection in humans? Are our genes even relevant anymore in that sense?
That's a vital caveat that our sources address directly. It is incorrect to assume that cultural evolution has replaced natural selection. Natural selection is still operating on us.
Really? Like
Right.
how?
For instance, studies documented selection favoring an earlier age at first reproduction in a particular isolated French-Canadian population. Between 1800 and 1939, the average age declined from 26 to 22 years, resulting in increased overall reproductive success for those families.
Huh. So biology continues its slow march even while culture sprints ahead.
Exactly. They're both happening.
Now, all of this acceleration in consciousness, it's supported by the physical hardware, right? The human brain.
The hardware, yes.
Uh-huh.
The sheer size difference compared to our closest relatives is remarkable. The average human brain is significantly larger in volume, even when you correct for body weight, than chimpanzee or gorilla brains.
Yeah.
We're talking like 300-ish% larger.
That's massive.
It is. And despite being only about 2% of our body weight, the adult human brain consumes up to 20% of our daily energy budget.
20%. Just for the brain.
Just for the brain. That high metabolic cost, sustained over a long lifetime, suggests there was incredibly powerful selective pressure to increase and maintain that size. It had to be worth it, evolutionarily speaking.
And the development pathway is different too, isn't it?
Very different. Human brains follow a unique growth trajectory compared to other primates. We have this rapid growth spurt that continues postnatally, after birth, till past 1 year of age. It effectively means human gestation is extended by about 12 months outside the womb.
That sort of fourth trimester.
You could call it that.
Yeah.
And if we were to peek inside, metaphorically speaking, if we examine the brain's internal geography, we'd see that much of this increase in volume is associated with the greater area and thickness of the cerebral cortex, specifically the prefrontal cortex.
And that's the part responsible for
Higher functions, things like perception, coordination, planning, complex decision-making. And it also heavily influences the regulation of our emotional responses that originate deeper in the midbrain and the limbic system.
Okay, let's try and connect some dots now by looking at how scientists have tried to frame these concepts. What about sociobiology? That term comes up a lot.
Right. E.O. Wilson famously defines sociobiology as the systematic study of the biological basis of all social behavior. It tends to ask the ultimate question: what is the underlying evolutionary function of a behavior, rather than just asking what immediately caused it, the proximate cause.
And the classic sticking point for this field was always altruism, wasn't it? An animal acting to benefit another at its own potential expense seemed hard to explain purely by individual survival.
It was. The explanation that developed was kin selection. The idea is that selection acts not just on the fitness of the individual organism, but also on the fitness of their close genetic relatives who share many of the same genes.
Like helping your siblings or cousins helps your shared genes survive.
Exactly. This is why, for instance, a female lion might nurse her own cubs and those of her sisters. They share a high percentage of genes. It makes evolutionary sense from the gene's perspective, so to speak.
But isn't saying that human nature is determined by heredity as much as by culture still skating dangerously close to that old nature-nurture dichotomy? How do sociobiologists justify that balance when culture moves so incredibly fast?
Well, they argue it reflects a continuous and complex interaction, these organism-gene-environment interactions. Genes set the potential, perhaps the predispositions, but culture and environment profoundly shape the expression. It's seen as a dynamic feedback loop, but the biological roots remain foundational in their view.
Okay. That sets us up then to address social Darwinism. This was a historical application of these kinds of ideas that, well, was often inappropriate and deeply problematic, wasn't it?
Deeply problematic is putting it mildly. Precisely. Social Darwinism, championed often by Herbert Spencer, who actually coined the phrase survival of the fittest, not Darwin, misapplied Darwin's biological concepts directly to human society, particularly to social structures.
What was the core idea?
Its core assertion was basically that differences among social classes, or even nations, arose naturally through a kind of evolutionary struggle, and that this therefore justified existing social class structures and power differences. Might makes right justified by nature.
And we saw this philosophy embraced by some prominent figures.
Oh, yes. Figures like John E. Rockefeller Jr., for instance, who reportedly justified the growth of huge monopolistic businesses by calling it merely the working out of a law of nature and a law of God, something he apparently said in a Sunday school class, ironically.
Wow. So what was the fundamental error there?
The fatal flaw was the assumption that society operates under the exact same laws as biological inheritance. This is just incorrect.
How so?
Because the laws governing wealth, power, social order, economic systems, those are man-made. They're cultural constructs. They can be consciously selected, debated, changed, directed toward any objective, whether that's socialism or laissez-faire capitalism or something else entirely.
Whereas biological inheritance.
Biological inheritance follows different rules, driven by genetic change and natural selection over generations. It's not subject to conscious human redesign in the same way our social or economic systems are. We can't just vote to change the laws of meiosis.
And the tragic consequences of confusing those man-made rules for immutable biological law were immense.
Absolutely devastating. These ideas were used to provide a pseudo-scientific justification for terrible acts of racism, genocide, eugenics, and oppression throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. Things like Hitler's racial health policies, harsh U.S. immigration restrictions in the 1920s aimed at certain groups, the White Australia policy. The list is long and grim.
Okay, so wrapping this up, what does this all mean? What's the big picture from this deep dive?
Well, I think our deep dive confirms pretty clearly that behavior is just not a simple nature or nurture equation. It's far more complex. It's a result of two interlinked yet vastly different speed systems of inheritance. the slow incremental genetic march and the incredibly rapid cultural sprint.
And human intelligence sort of turbocharged the cultural side.
Exactly. It created this powerful feedback loop that has radically changed the evolutionary path of our entire species in a remarkably short amount of time, geologically speaking.
Which brings us back to those chimps. The fact that a scientific cladistic analysis, a way scientists map out evolutionary relationships, showed that the behavioral and cultural differences between chimpanzee populations were actually greater than the genetic differences between their subspecies. That really makes you think, doesn't it?
It really does.
It raises a pretty big question. In terms of adaptiveness and our future direction, just how far into the future is our cultural inheritance now guiding us, potentially quite independent of the slow selection pressure on our genes?
That is a provocative thought, isn't it? Something for you to definitely chew on as you reflect on the ultimate power of learning and culture.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the evolution of social behavior and culture. We hope you feel thoroughly informed.